Released in April of 2019, Katana Zero is an action platformer where a Japanese swordsman slices and dices his way through goons as he hunts down targets to be assassinated, assisted by a special precognition ability he has that lets him see into the future to determine the best path forward. The story of the game initially centers on this swordsman's missions, which are supposedly to eradicate drug trafficking. But over the course of 10 days, the swordsman learns of details that reveal the true purpose of these contracts, while at the same time, learning more about himself. As the mystery unravels, the swordsman comes to understand his place in a dark conspiracy meant to cover up the crimes of those in power. Here is a summary of all of what the swordsman learns in those 10 days. The story of Katana Zero. A couple of things to note before we get started. There's obviously going to be spoilers for the game here, so consider this your warning. Also, for the dialogue choices in the game, I tried to include all relevant information from the dialogues as I could, but may have cut some stuff out if it wasn't relevant or was stated earlier. Also, I went with the cooperative dialogue choices with the Psychologist, as I feel like that's what gives out the most information. But the secret that comes with the uncooperative choices will also be mentioned. But I think that's everything, so let's get started. It all begins on the first day on a dark and stormy night, where the swordsman is infiltrating a warehouse. He receives a call reminding him of his mission, to rescue a scientist that's imprisoned here. His swordsmanship allows him to make easy work of those he faces, but his fighting ability is enhanced by an incredible precognition power. The swordsman has an ability to slow down time around him, giving him incredible reflexes. But in addition to that, he can peer into the future and see which actions he can take to give him his most desired outcome. If something happens that he doesn't like, he can rewind back to the point where he started and try again, essentially giving him immortality. With these abilities, he quickly makes his way through the building, reaching the scientist with ease. The two begin to make their escape until suddenly, the collar around the scientist's neck detonates, blowing up his head in a gory explosion. A blue-haired man appears, laughing at the carnage. Through his Russian accent, he sends men to kill the swordsman, walking off to leave them to it. The swordsman quickly deals with these attackers and escapes the building. With his mission failed, he returns home to his small, messy apartment in the city's run-down 3rd District, a place full of drug addicts and junkies. The familiar boom of music blasting from his neighbor's apartment greets him as he drinks herbal tea he's prepared and turns on the news, which is talking about the aftermath of his mission. Hoping it can drown out the music, he lies down on the couch and goes to sleep. That night, he has a dream. A little boy is tossing a ball with a small, shadowy figure. Another one storms in, then charges him. This scares the swordsman out of his sleep as the sun rises. Every day, the swordsman has a visit with a psychologist, a man wearing glasses in a red suit. Through these meetings, we learn a bit more about the protagonist, namely that he suffered an injury in his past that caused him to lose his memory. The only link to his past life is a service medal he received in recognition of his service, and these meetings are held in an effort to rehabilitate the swordsman. The nightmare could be a side effect of that trauma, and during the visit today, the two discuss the dream, clearing up some of the murky details within it. However, these meetings have a dual purpose, as it's the psychologist that assigns the swordsman his missions, which aim to eliminate illegal drug trafficking in the 3rd District. As he walks to his desk to get a file, he also pulls a syringe, walks over to the swordsman, and injects him with the substance, who feels the world warp and slow around him. The swordsman is also given a dossier, which has tonight's mission and is sent on his way. His target tonight is a billionaire by the name of Josh Rose that has clandestine involvement in the movement of war drugs. The swordsman makes his way to the Murdower Hotel, talks his way past the receptionist, and calls the elevator. As it arrives, 2 of Rose's men emerge, one of whom flees back up the elevator, radioing in the appearance of the Dragon. The swordsman easily makes his way through the hotel, until reaching Josh Rose's penthouse. The two have a short conversation in which Josh Rose says something interesting. "I'm surprised there's more than one of you left." The swordsman's follow-up questions don't reveal anything more, and the billionaire soon hops over the railing and falls to his death, completing the mission. Just before the swordsman gets home, he's bumped into in his hallway by a little girl. In their short conversation, they find that they're neighbors. She soon runs off, and the swordsman repeats his nightly ritual, drinks tea, and lies down to sleep with the news on, trying to drown out his noisy neighbors. He has his dream again, but it's a little different this time. A different shadow follows after the scientist, executes him, then fires upon the child, waking the swordsman to a new day. He returns to the man in red for his daily visit, where they discuss his dream for a bit until the topic turns to the swordsman's personal life. The meeting of the little girl in the swordsman's building surprises the psychologist, who notes that the 3rd district is not a safe place for kids, then pushes the swordsman to isolate himself from any interaction. With that, their time is up, and the psychologist pulls a new dossier and another syringe for the swordsman. He injects the swordsman with his medicine and sends him on his mission. Tonight, the swordsman is tasked with killing DJ Electrohead, who is involved in trafficking club drugs. Interestingly, the dossier mentions that he shouldn't be spoken to, and after the swordsman sneaks through the dance floor and slices his way through the club, this point is reiterated to him once again. But the swordsman defies his orders, listening to the frightened DJ's ramblings when he charges in. In his inane babble, Electrohead mentions taking a drug that has warped his perception of time, how it's been slowing down or repeating for him. This piques the swordsman's interest. Those symptoms sound drastically similar to his own precognition ability. What kind of drug could cause that? The swordsman then remembers his daily treatment administered by the psychologist, which begs the question, is the drug that Electrohead is talking about the same one that he's injected with every day? In his terror, the DJ offers to give what he has to the swordsman, but just as his offer is accepted, a bullet tears through his helmet, killing him. The club empties out, and the swordsman catches a glimpse of a familiar figure among those fleeing. He makes his escape himself and heads home, where he finds the girl he ran into last night playing with a toy named Behemoth outside his door. She accuses him of hiding Behemoth's brother, Leviathan, in his apartment, saying she knows he's inside thanks to the red glow Behemoth gives off. A quick search of the apartment reveals the King of the Sea under the couch, and after a cute reunion scene, the girl leaves Leviathan with the swordsman. He places the toy on his counter, drinks his tea, and lies down to sleep. His rest is again plagued by his dream, but again, things are different. After the scientist is executed, the large shadow throws the small one against the machine, which turns them into Leviathan. The ending is the same, however, as is the swordsman's emergence to a new day. The visit with the psychologist today is a lot more tense, as details of Electrohead's death leave the man in red suspicious of the circumstances of his end. The swordsman soon fesses that he spoke to the musician, which greatly angers the psychologist. He calms himself and offers to discuss some of the things the swordsman heard from the DJ. Through this conversation, the swordsman learns a few things. First, that the drug Electrohead was taking could be the same as his, and the power it offers is the reason they need to make sure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands, which is the true motive of their missions. He also gets confirmation that his precognition ability does in fact come from his medicine, the substance that's injected into his arm every day. But his fighting ability is something that's been harnessed over a number of years. These answers sate the swordsman's curiosity, and he sits still as the man in red gives him his daily dose. As the swordsman leaves, the psychologist informs him of the moniker given to him by the media, the Dragon, and pushes him to be more covert in the future to avoid drawing further attention to them. The mission tonight is the assassination of Fa Yuan, a prisoner within Mutual Nil High Security Prison. It's a strange one, as the supplementary information on him doesn't mention drugs at all, but implies a more political motivation behind his end. The psychologist's request for a more stealthy approach is echoed in the dossier, as the swordsman is asked to assassinate his target without killing anyone else. With that in mind, the swordsman infiltrates the prison and finds everyone already dead, including his target. The sudden arrival of reinforcements necessitates the swordsman's escape before he can investigate further, which only brings up questions in his mind. Who else was targeting Fa Yuan? Was it for the same reason that he was sent? And who could have the incredible ability to slaughter all of those men to get to Yuan? He suddenly remembers something Josh Rose said. "I'm surprised there's more than one of you left." He then hears a voice. It's a homeless veteran begging on the street. The swordsman walks past, which angers the man, and a confrontation looms. Depending on if the swordsman followed his orders in his mission, this conflict can have different outcomes. If he chose to spill the blood of any of the reinforcements, the two can fight over the swordsman's service medal before the swordsman leaves a veteran cowering in fear of him. But if the swordsman chose to follow his orders and stay his blade, then there's an itch in his arm. And with the veteran hurling insults at him, he chooses to scratch that itch by stabbing the man there on the street and leaving his body to rot. Either way, he's greeted once again by his child neighbor, who tells him that some guy gave her a videotape to give to him. She asks if she can watch it with him, which is left up to the swordsman's discretion. But either way, he takes time to watch the tape. While two stoners sit on their couch talking about trains, there's a knock on their door. In charges the blue-haired Russian who has come to party with them, but his idea of a party differs slightly from theirs. He eventually ties up the other man and gives him a gift, an injection of a substance he says is a work in progress. As he pulls a pair of wire cutters, he describes its effects, which catches the swordsman's attention. It sounds just like his medicine. The Russian then proceeds to torture the man, cutting his fingers, punching him in the face, screaming at him. While enjoying it, he soon reveals why he's torturing him. He's doing it as a favor to their neighbor, who doesn't like their partying and can't get any sleep because of it. As the Russian gushes over the accomplishments of their neighbor, the swordsman turns off the TV. He then realizes who the men were as the eerie, unfamiliar silence fills his apartment. There's a dream again tonight, and it's changed yet again. The boy is playing alone with Leviathan, and when the shadow comes in, he hides under the bed. After the scientist is executed, the shadow walks to the machine, and as it comes to life, the swordsman wakes from his nightmare. Today, he finds his psychologist's office is strangely closed. He makes his way back home, getting caught in the rain. A passerby stops and offers him a ride. It's the blue-haired Russian. As the swordsman sits down, the Russian reveals his admiration for him and seeks validation from him, which he doesn't get. He turns the conversation to drugs, mentioning a wartime combat drug that he's involved with remaking. The swordsman wonders if that could be what he injected into the man last night, if that could be what his medicine is. The Russian asks for the swordsman to come with him to Studio 51 so they could work together, in return for the Russian dealing with his noisy neighbors. The swordsman's refusal angers him, perhaps worsened by the drugs he took, and he kicks the swordsman out of the limo. However, the swordsman's curiosity to find out more about that drug pulls him to give chase, and he eventually arrives at Studio 51, where he overhears the Russian talking to someone on the phone, someone named Snow. The swordsman dramatically reveals himself in the stream of the streetlight to the surprise of the Russian. Still angry, he pulls a gun, levels it at the swordsman's head, and fires. But it's reflected back to him. Confused, he runs off, and the swordsman chases him into Studio 51. He finds him on the top floor of the building, again on the phone. He hangs up, and the two soon get into a fight. Just as it looks like the swordsman is about to win, someone else cuts their way in. The swordsman then sees a woman in a kimono standing behind the Russian, and when she takes a moment to size him up, sees she also wields a katana. This is Snow, the person the Russian has been speaking to on the phone, and she soon turns to the swordsman, giving him a chance to leave with his life as long as he forgets all that he saw here. The two vanish in a cloud of pink petals with some parting words from Snow, leaving the swordsman free to leave. Once he reaches home, he starts his nightly ritual, but it's interrupted by a knock on his door. When he opens the door, the girl appears and screams, "Trick or treat!" It's Halloween, and in an adorable gesture, she dressed up as him for her costume. The swordsman grabs some choco sticks he has in his cupboard and sends the girl on his way. With the news attributing the deaths of those that died in the Mutual Nil prison to the dragon, the swordsman drifts off to sleep. He isn't visited by his familiar nightmare tonight, but by two men in lab coats wearing masks, one of silver with a look of sadness upon it, and another of gold wearing a gleeful grin. Having been drugged, the swordsman is forced to lie and listen as one extravagantly waxes poetic about the story of his fate. The other simplifies his meaning and translates it for him. In 3 days, he's going to have to choose life or death at the cost of the other. With their message delivered, the men vanish as the swordsman wakes up and has one of the strangest mornings ever. He appears in his psychologist's office, apparently in the middle of a conversation, but confused as to how he arrived. As the conversation proceeds, it seems like the man in red isn't even listening. That is until he insults him. The man walks over to him, orders him to stand, and then morphs into the Russian and punches him. The swordsman is thrown to the floor of a mansion where he busts through a door. The swordsman busts through a door and kills those that stand in. Swordsman busts through a door and killed those that stand in his way. Swordsman busts through a door and killed those that stand. Swordsman busts through a. He's then walking the length of an extremely long cathedral, remembering his past, shrugging off the killing of soldiers, but expressing regret over the death of the peasants. He talks about how time is repeating, slowing down, agonizingly stretching everything out, thanks to the drug. He asks for a favor, but is then sitting on the ground in the rain, repeating the words of the homeless veteran from a few days ago. Tragedy and comedy stand close by, commenting on his drug use, deciding to ignore his pleas for help. He's then sitting before the corpse of the psychologist, blood in his hands with his neighbor skewered into the wall with his sword. There's a familiar pinch in his arm, a warping of the world around him, and then suddenly, the visions stop. They were apparently a side effect of going without his medicine for some time. He's been handed a new dossier, and so exits the office. The target tonight is a man named Al-Qasim, and again, the dossier doesn't mention anything explicitly about drugs, but does mention that the man was involved with military R&D. This seems strange, but with the new knowledge he gained from the Russian, the swordsman realizes things may be more connected than they seem. He infiltrates the mansion and is surprised to see that the Russian is actually here. He crashes in, attempting to take him down, but the Russian escapes. The swordsman proceeds through the mansion, and after passing a hallway that seems familiar, he finds a body suspended in a vat of bright blue liquid. It's a really strange thing to have in a mansion. But he wasn't sent here to investigate this. He was sent to assassinate someone. So he proceeds until an unexpected explosion knocks him out. A voice pulls him to consciousness, where he finds he's tied up at the mercy of the Russian. He gives the swordsman a chance at final words, then orders his associate, Mr. Kissyface, to get rid of his body. Mr. Kissyface acknowledges the Russian, calling him V, and the swordsman's life is ended by a shot to the head. A voice pulls him to consciousness, where he finds he's tied up at the mercy of V. V is unsettled by the swordsman's knowledge of his name, but he's got a date coming up, so he finishes things up by killing the swordsman. A voice pulls him to consciousness, where he finds he's tied up at the mercy of V. He taunts V by reminding him of his date. V stands in silence for a moment, then realizes what's going on. The fact that the swordsman knows information that he's never said means the swordsman is on Kronos. That's the name of the drug that gives the swordsman his precognition ability, which he's been using throughout this interaction to try and find a way out of it. There are muffled groans from the other side of the room, and it's revealed that al-Qasim is actually V's prisoner as well. He's being interrogated by the Russian, who is trying to find out how to make the substance from him. But his reluctance to talk angers V, who soon starts pounding him into the ground. Running out of time for playing games, V turns his attention to the swordsman and tries to get information out of him. But the swordsman, knowing how quick V is to anger, uses that against him and starts trash-talking him to make him lose his cool. The tactic works like a charm. After ruining his own plan by killing al-Qasim and coming up with a flimsy lie, V leaves the swordsman to Mr. Kissyface. It's the opportunity the swordsman needs to quickly escape his bonds, retrieve his sword, and start a battle with Mr. Kissyface for his life. Outside, as the sun rises on a new day, V and Snow are talking about their mission. Well, more accurately, about the failure of their mission. The only saving grace being the elimination of the swordsman. Snow takes a moment to describe his lifeless eyes, his ruthless handiwork, and then makes it a point to commend V, stating the swordsman was no ordinary gnoll. A call from their boss pulls her away, and V lights up a cigarette to celebrate a job well done. Just then, the body of one of his men crashes through the window, and the swordsman kicks open the front door. He's survived his fight with Mr. Kissyface, and now chases after V to finish the job. The pursuit becomes a highly visible, action-packed confrontation on the 1st District Highway, complete with a motorcycle versus helicopter showdown between the two, which ends in the fiery crash of the helicopter. As V lies bloody on the ground, he brags about killing Null before, and that the swordsman, the dragon, isn't going to stop him. The two then hear a voice say that the swordsman is not the dragon. As red fills the screen, the same voice says, "I am," and the figure slices their way in, cutting off V's hand. As the swordsman flees, he catches a glimpse of a tall, blonde-haired man who picks V up and cuts off his other arm. The events of the morning caused him to miss his visit with the psychologist, so he takes the night for himself and visits a bar in the 3rd District. There are only 2 other men in the bar, veterans of a war lamenting its end. They're skeptical of the swordsman's veteran status, even when he shows them his service medal, but things are smoothed over when he joins them in a prejudiced toast. Throughout the night, the swordsman comes to learn of some things in conversations with the vets, like New Mecca losing a war 7 years ago, despite being on the verge of victory thanks to 1st District protests about child killings. One of the vets also shares a story with the swordsman about a government combat drug program that apparently made psychic super soldiers that were ruthless killers. He goes on to tell a story describing their powers, but the swordsman already knows all about it. After all, it's the same as his precognition ability. The swordsman finally makes his way home after a long night of drinking. The girl comes up to him, but he can't understand her, so goes into his apartment, where he collapses into an uninterrupted sleep. It's the knock on his door that finally wakes him up, and of course, it's the girl. He listens to how distressed she was last night, and to make it up to her, throws together a quick, not too great breakfast. He lets her stay here for the day and sets out for his daily visit. The psychologist is upset over recent events, and he begins a long rant chastising the swordsman, but he's soon glitched away, and the swordsman is again looking at a mutilated V. The Russian tells him his pain is nothing like what the swordsman has to go through. He then tells him of the withdrawal, of how when Kronos leaves the system, he'll feel time slow down until it stops completely. He'll be stuck in his mind, constantly dying over and over again, reversing time only to die again and again and again. An eternity of torture that will never end. It's something he'll have to deal with later as the psychologist gives him another hit and pulls him from his hallucination. His condescending mocking of the dragon causes the swordsman to reveal what he learned that morning on the highway. After the swordsman describes who he saw, the psychologist changes the swordsman's mission for the day, giving him a new dossier and sending him to kill the dragon. The swordsman is led to a casino in Chinatown where upstairs, the dragon is talking to a woman, revealing what he learned from V and trying to get her to help him, but she refuses his offer. Their conversation ends when the swordsman enters the room, and the woman sends the dragon on his way. A fight breaks out between her and the swordsman, ending in her defeat. Or it seemed that way, but she fights off the swordsman and escapes. Alone in the office, the swordsman searches the desk for anything that could offer him more information, and he finds a security tape from Mutual Nil prison. The sudden arrival of police prevents him from searching further, and although he flees, they tarry him the entire way across Chinatown. They eventually manage to surround the swordsman and order him to give himself up. Then, time slows, and a voice sounds out. Tragedy appears before the swordsman, and suddenly the sky turns to a starry night, and silhouetted against it are comedy and tragedy, who tell him now is the time that he must make the decision they told him of 3 nights ago. Now is the time where he must choose the golden mask of life or the silver mask of death. They offer him one final warning before he chooses, that his decision is going to affect more than just himself. It will affect those around him as well. With that final warning ringing in his head, the swordsman sees what could happen if he wears the golden mask of life and chooses to die. A death at the hands of the firing squad surrounding him, and an end to his story. But this is not the end he has envisioned for himself. He tells the dramatic duo that he wants to live, that he will don the silver mask of death and bear the consequences of his decision. With that, the two turn to the police that surround them, all simultaneously crumble before them. They vanish, and the swordsman flees the scene, having failed in his mission and knowing there will be severe consequences. When he makes it home, he finds the girl has cleaned up his apartment, and since she's bored, the two rent samurai movies to watch together. After she dozes off, the swordsman takes the opportunity to watch the tape he found in the casino office. The guard's conversation leads the swordsman to realize it's from the same night that he was sent to kill Fa Yuan, and suddenly the dragon erupts from a hole in the wall. As he slices his way through the prison, the swordsman realizes it was he that left all the bodies that littered the building when he arrived. He watches as the dragon gets all the way to Yuan's cell and interrogates the man, who also had a connection to Kronos. Yuan gives the dragon some helpful information. That it's not the government trying to bring Kronos back, but whoever it is, they must have some pretty deep pockets. He also gives him the name of the creator of Kronos, a man named Leon von Alvensleben. Satisfied with what he's gotten, the dragon kills Yuan, leaving his body for the swordsman to find moments later. That ends the swordsman's night, and the next morning when he's going to talk to the psychologist, he gets a phone call. The voice on the other end mentions Leon and points the swordsman to a slaughterhouse in the 3rd district with a promise that his questions will be answered. The swordsman ditches his appointment and heads into the slaughterhouse where, not far in, a TV screen sparks to life with the face of Leon. He takes this moment to explain what this building used to be. A facility where soldiers were tested to ascertain their suitability for the Null Project. Wanting to know more, the swordsman proceeds further and further inside, being subjected to these tests, and at its conclusion, he's ranked as a Gamma Null. Leon explains what Gamma Null were. People who were given Kronos as children and trained to become super soldiers. But since the war was lost, Null and Kronos were failures, and the project has ended. After destroying the Kronos he has left, he tells the swordsman he should no longer exist. The swordsman's curiosity pulls him deeper into the facility despite Leon's protests, eventually coming to a lab. Here he finds pre-recorded messages of all of what Leon has said to him, indicating he was never speaking to him this entire time. There are other messages that are rather interesting. One names Josh Rose, the billionaire the swordsman assassinated. and another mentions payment being in a storage unit in the 2nd District, which might be where Electrohead stumbled upon his supply of Chronos. The final one is an order to leave the cryo tank at the end of the lab alone. Curious, the swordsman wanders over to the tank, opens it, and out falls Leon, who then rapidly ages in front of the swordsman until he dissolves away into dust. An alarm starts blaring, so the swordsman flees the lab and heads home. When he gets home, he's greeted by the little girl who pulls him to come and see a cool thing she found today. She pulls him to the roof where the two look out over a beautiful vista of the city, shining brightly in the valley below. The swordsman pulls his service medal out, explaining that to him, it's a reminder that he did something good once. He tosses the medal from the edge of the building to be lost in the trash below. When asked why he did that, he explains he has another reminder now. The serenity of the scene is tainted by ominous darkness when the little girl expresses a fear of hers, the reappearance of men in masks. But her fears are put to rest from the swordsman, who promises to protect the friend he's come to care so much for. The following morning is one of cheer, and the little girl gives Behemoth to the swordsman so that Leviathan can have a friend, just like how she has one in him. The two say their goodbyes as the swordsman sets out to visit the psychologist, who is not at all pleased with his recent actions. As he begins to lay into him about the importance of their mission, the swordsman confronts the man in red and orders him to tell him the truth. And the swordsman finally gets confirmation of all he's uncovered and an explanation of who he is. Null were secret super soldiers that were created with experimental combat drugs by New Mecha during the war. The swordsman was placed in the project thanks to the psychopathic behavior observed in his youth, eventually attaining the rank of Gamma, which was reserved for the most elite of the unit. While the Null unit itself was a secret, during the war they were used for morally dubious missions, the results of which were known to the public and received criticism. Protests of these missions eventually led to the end of the war, and once it ended, Chronos production ceased, which had an unintended side effect on the Null soldiers, who died of Chronos withdrawal. That is the eventual fate of the swordsman, one he's actively marching towards by complying in these missions to eliminate anyone that knows of Chronos. Once he's done killing all of his targets, he'll be left to die or be eliminated. It's a fate that the psychologist admits is out of his hands. With the cold reality sinking in, he sits still as the man in red gives him another dose of the substance that's keeping him alive, and leaves to complete his next mission. Tonight, it's not one target, but the complete elimination of all sensitive material within al-Qasim's bunker. After making his way past a familiar receptionist, the swordsman fights his way down into the depths of the bunker. It eventually finds another one of those strange vats he found in al-Qasim's mansion, and then another, and another. He passes a half dozen of these oddities in his descent, wondering if they're a part of the sensitive information he's meant to eliminate. Then an explosion from a suicide bomber throws him to the ground. He falls unconscious. The darkness fades into his nightmare, but this time with one new detail added. The word Null is spoken by the scientist, and the shadowy figure takes shape as a uniformed Null soldier. He quickly wakes up and continues his descent until coming face to face with the woman that was in the casino office talking to the dragon. The woman is wearing similar attire to the figure in his dream. They have a short fight, resulting in the floor being blown out from under them, where they end up in front of al-Qasim's vault. They have a short conversation, whereupon the woman reveals that she too is Null, and used to be used by al-Qasim as a contract killer. She was paid in Chronos, which is how she's been able to live since the end of the war. It's a situation that sounds really familiar to the swordsman's own. Except, now that her supplier is dead, the woman doesn't have a way to get more Chronos. And since there's none here, she is in withdrawal. as the woman explains what their battle is going to be like, explaining the mental duel that's taking place between the two of them in this moment. She's cut down by the swordsman. As she crawls towards him, she begs him to get back at those that made them these monsters, then dies before the door of the vault. The door can only be unlocked with a retinal scan, so the swordsman decapitates the woman and uses her head to get inside the vault. Inside, he doesn't find treasure or secrets. He finds a cowering family. As he pulls his sword, he finds himself standing in front of the boy from his dreams, his duty pulling him to complete his task, but something within him holding him back. Then, the hallucination glitches away, and he spares the family as he realizes the truth behind his dream. He returns to his psychologist's office to confront him with what he's learned about his dream. Yet the man isn't listening to him at all, panicking about the swordsman's abandonment of his mission yet again, scared that their employers are going to be coming for him. When he finally notices the swordsman, he orders him to leave. But the swordsman steps forward, knocks him to the ground, and brutally murders the man in red by smashing his head in. However, this isn't how it plays out in the swordsman's head. As the psychologist noted, he's in withdrawal, and in his mind, the psychologist throws him to the ground. Mentioning other combat drugs developed by the government, he injects himself with syringes the swordsman has never seen before, and floats into the air. He then launches an attack on the swordsman that's wild, cerebral, incomprehensible, and utterly impossible. As he mentally battles with this grotesque monster, the swordsman collects the chronos that the psychologist had left and injects himself with it, resulting in the hallucination fading away to the quiet office where the lifeless body of his attacker lies before him. Checking the desk, he gets a lead on where he can find more chronos now that his supplier has died, and also notices a dossier. It's one on him and gives him the name Subject Zero. It orders his elimination if he ever began questioning his role or learned of the manufacture of chronos, confirming his suspicion that he was just a tool to be thrown out when he'd outlived his usefulness. He heads home where he finds there's been an incident at his apartment building. According to the police, his neighbor had been burglarized and was murdered in the break-in. The swordsman's apartment was another casualty of the robbery. When he enters his apartment, he finds it a total mess. Leviathan and Behemoth are torn apart on the ground, and there's also a note on the wall. It reads, "One life for another." He exits and asks the police where the little girl is, and when no one has any answers and actually say that there's no little girl living here, he turns frantic, angry. The police get defensive and try to apprehend him, but the swordsman escapes their grasp. As they radio in his description, one offers the possibility that he could be the guy, perhaps the one responsible for killing all those men in Chinatown. While running through the streets of the city, he remembers his dream, which was indeed a memory from his past. The little boy plays with Leviathan until the scientist runs in and gets executed by the arrival of a Null soldier. The Null calmly walks over to the computer and inputs some commands. While it fries itself, he picks up the blue toy, stows it in their uniform, and exits the building. Radioing in as Zero, they announce the success of their mission. Pulling off the headgear, it's revealed the figure is the swordsman, also known as Zero, and he regroups with his ally, 15, who is known as the Dragon. The two then make their way back to base, leaving the smoldering ruins of the village to burn away. The credits begin to roll, signifying the approaching conclusion, but dotted throughout are follow-up scenes. Snow arrives in a large office to report V's death to someone, presumably her employer, who ominously alludes to a bloody conflict that looms in the future. Snow is seen still clutching V's necklace. 15 is seen standing before a large board covered in notes, presumably all the data he's gathered while completing his vendetta. V's lifeless body sits in a dark room off to the side. The credits end, promising that a continuation of the story will be coming, but is soon glitched away. Cowering in a single stream of light, the little girl sits in fear of the monsters of her dreams. There are words hinting at her tragic future, likely the consequence of the swordsman's decision to wear the silver mask of death. Darkness takes the trio, signifying the end of Katana Zero. Puzzling, psychedelic, and thrilling, the story of Katana Zero pulls us through its mystery in such a way that it's hard not to get engrossed in trying to solve it, and there are still so many burning questions left unanswered. Hopefully, the follow-up can help answer these questions and give us a fitting end to our favorite katana-wielding swordsman. Now, I'm not perfect. There's probably some errors in there, and considering this is made before the follow-up came out, I'm sure some of it will eventually be wrong or explained later, but I tried to explain all the relevant parts of the game that I could, and I certainly hope you enjoyed. If there's still something you're unsure about, or maybe you still have some questions about something else, feel free to ask and I'll do my best to answer them. But that's all for this one. Thank you for watching and see you later.